I've just waiting for a response from I believe it's a gentleman that's getting ready to join me for this stream in regards to discussing Bitcoin. And I would imagine we'll be touching down on the whole underlying aspect of Bitcoin, which is blockchain technology, the underlying structure for cryptocurrencies. Like I said, I sent the stream link to the gentleman. I believe it's a gentleman, and I'm just waiting for them to join. Oh, here we go. Okay, I see him in the chat there now. Hey, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Excellent. Very nice to hear. So you're a gentleman that you have some in-depth knowledge regarding Bitcoin, I assume.
That's right. Yes, it's an interesting, quick little story, if I may.
Yeah, just dig right in. Yeah, go for it. There's not too many people there in the chat just yet. A little late getting the notification stuff, but if you just want to go ahead, because it's just the only people that won't hear what you're saying right now are the people that are going to come to chat a little bit late. Maybe if you want, actually, before you delve into it, do you want to give yourself a little bit of a background, like what you got you involved in it first? Maybe just give people a couple minutes to join the stream.
Oh, absolutely. That was actually my plan.
Oh, okay. So, perfect.
Yeah. So basically, I won't go into my entire life history, but I was living in the United States for a large amount of time in the mid 2000s, and I came back to Canada in 2012. And actually, I had realized that there were a lot of values that I didn't connect with most people, like, liberty, taxation, monetary policy, all these things. And I didn't actually know if there was a word for it. And I thought I was kind of at odds with most people. And then I somehow got invited to a barbecue here in British Columbia for the BC Libertarian Party.
Oh,
I don't even know how I got on the mailing list, but I showed up to the interview and I was like, wow, there's a name for this. It's called libertarianism. That's amazing.
Nice.
And the other massive thing that happened was somebody talked to me about something called Bitcoin. And I was like, what is Bitcoin? And he said, well, you're a computer science guy. You're a math guy. I mean, Bitcoin is the libertarian new currency. It's the gold standard for currencies driven by computer science and math. Right. And I was like, really? Okay, I got to hear about it. And there was a fellow I met there. And, one thing led to another. And I was in. I was completely taken in by it. And I bought my first Bitcoin thereafter. It was unfortunately only one Bitcoin, but, it was a good time to get in. And, one thing led to another. I started
just curious. When you say you got your first Bitcoin, I'm just real curious. What exactly was the price of that Bitcoin when you got the first one?
$100 Canadian.
Nice. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, it had just gone from a 10 to 100, and I was thinking, gee, I don't want to get many of them. I'll just get one. Right. So, it was pretty amazing because my life almost changed, and I'm not exaggerating. I did a lot of work in the crypto space thereafter by coincidence, and I met my co-founder here at my company, Bluezell Networks, that I run a software company in Canada and Singapore, and we work with cryptocurrencies. That's all we do. So, we launched a cryptocurrency of our own using initial coin offering in 2018. Okay. And we've been working with cryptocurrencies ever since. And of course, Bitcoin is it's the first mover, right?
Yes.
It's the original one.
Yes. Well, I mean, Bitcoin, and I would say your theme would be, I think, the two leading edges in terms of using cryptocurrency, which actually, now that we got a couple people in the chat, though, actually, that's the thing that people need to understand, because cryptocurrency, well, to me, because what you're going to be referenced, I would imagine, is this way to get out from underneath the fiat currencies, because fiat currencies now is in the hand of central planners that can manipulate every aspect of our economic worth. So cryptocurrencies, just like gold or silver in the past, was a way to hedge against people that had this ability to manipulate your worth or your value. And that's what I, as a libertarian myself, now I wasn't as quick to adopt it because I was a little bit unsure of this thing. Unfortunately, I don't have a science, what would you say, economic scientist or whatever degree like you had. A lot of the younger people today that are more conducive with this stuff, I wish I was wise because earlier on, because I probably would have been doing much better myself. But I guess the main thing to me would be, for anything to be a descriptor in terms of money, as far as I'm concerned, as a libertarian, it has to have three main functions, right? So it has to has a means to measure value, right? Which Bitcoin is doing that fairly decent at this point. You have to have a means to exchange that value. That's one thing about the underlying ledger system, the blockchain. It does that perfectly, right? So that's excellent. Then you have to have the means of retaining your value. Well, as we're seeing, because of the fiat currencies and how they're manipulated, well, just like with gold, if we were still tied to the gold standard, every time the central planners print their fiat currencies, well, you would see not just $1,600 gold, what you're seeing today, but you'd see, ridiculous into the multi-thousands or tens of thousands in terms of gold, because that would be a way to genuinely retain, because as you depreciate one area, that's supposed to suggest that it's a means of exchange or a measure of retention. If that's failing, well, the one that's more steady, which is what the underlying blockchain technology, that's the area, like I say, that is, to me, that's the most important thing as a libertarian. And I think you're going to do a much better job than I can. So I'll just kind of give you the center stage here and just explain to people how this can be used, and not just in means of like going to the store and purchasing a consumable good, but just to kind of help explain the underlying structure that is the basis for these cryptocurrencies and how much that can actually help in so many areas of our in terms of what money even means.
Absolutely. You know what? I liked how you started with the the three kind of facets for a currency, and I'll try to kind of describe one of the reasons that I started writing a blog, which I haven't put together publicly yet, and I contacted you, was I run into a lot of people, especially outside of the libertarian space, but especially even libertarians that, like you and even maybe myself at one point, were hesitant about Bitcoin because you can't really touch it, you can't see it.
Right.
Even the money that we hear about that was once upon a time backed by the gold standard, there was gold sitting somewhere. So that there's something backing it. Right. And the problem people run into is, well, is Bitcoin just some sort of scam? Is it just another scam on the internet like anything else? So let me try to address that first before we talk about the utility of Bitcoin and how we can use it in our country. So I look at any sort of cryptocurrency or anything really that's considered money to have really two key things. I mean, tradability is definitely important. The two key things that I talk about are the scarcity, the fact that you shouldn't be able to create this at will. Now, this first thing I'm bringing up almost immediately contradicts what most countries in the world are doing to central banks. You look at the Fed in the United States, they can print money at will. If you look at even Canada, we have a central banking system that's off the gold standard. We can do the same. And most countries have kind of followed suit, especially since, the early 20th century. Bitcoin cannot be printed at will. It is guarded by mathematical processes and algorithms. And one of the cliches I love as a mathematician is math never lies. 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. You can't change it. You can't violate the laws of physics and biology. These things don't change. And it's ingenious because it was defined by mathematical laws. Right. So Bitcoin is actually, interestingly, a lot of the semantics around Bitcoin are actually tied to gold. For example, how do you find Bitcoin? You mine it. This is not a coincidence. It was purposely defined that way because it was created to have a new digital equivalent to the gold standard in a currency that can be traded. So because of that, you mine Bitcoin, and I can get into it, but it's incredibly difficult to find Bitcoin. If you do a look on the internet on how do I actually mine and find Bitcoin, you'll notice that it takes enormous amount of computer power, electricity, time to find Bitcoin. And that's why you have this whole paradigm of miners, Bitcoin computers that are trying to work together to find Bitcoin. And they actually have to work together just to find Bitcoin because it is such a difficult problem to solve. Now, if you look at gold, similar thing. You don't see people out there digging for gold on their own. You've got large mining conglomerates that want to find gold, and it's relatively scarce, and the supply for it is also relatively stable. So let's make sure we're clear about one thing. The supply of Bitcoin is rare. It's a rare substance, and that's not really going to change. The next thing is auditability.
Just to check so that people in the chat kind of know what your reference there. So what is it? I believe, as far as I understand, I'm sure you can correct me this, it's 21 million ultimately Bitcoins that can ultimately be mined, right? Is that how it's supposed to go?
That's right. There's actually already a cap on the ultimate number of Bitcoins that will ever exist. And it's 21 million, as you said.
So that, like you say, that does cause a sense, well, a genuine reality of scarcity, because like you say, there's only so much that can, just like on the planet Earth, right? I mean, nobody knows the exact amount, but there's definitely a finite amount of things, such as some of our consumable goods that you would use, such as gold or silver, like you say. And that is one of those things that gives it its value. So anyways, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting there.
No, absolutely. That's a fantastic point, and definitely, pop in with those questions. I don't know what people don't know. So I like that sort of format. But yeah, it's a very nice analogy to gold as well. As you said, we don't know how many atoms of gold exist on Earth. It is fixed. It's not going up. Right. So Bitcoin has been created that way. And even though there's 21 million Bitcoins that are going to exist at some point, let me explain that Bitcoin, you don't have to go and spend one Bitcoin when you go to buy, a loaf of bread. You can actually spend a millionth of a Bitcoin. And people say, well, that's inconvenient. What, am I going to spend 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin? You can actually use the term micro Bitcoin or milli Bitcoin. You don't actually have to walk around saying, oh, I have 10 Bitcoins in my pocket. So let's not get too caught up on the word Bitcoin or milli Bitcoin. It's just units, and it's divisible to a large number of decimal places. So yeah, there is a limit on the amount of Bitcoin, and that, compared to gold is very similar. And compared to, the number of Canadian or US dollars floating around, that's a really important feature, because there isn't going to be an unlimited amount of it that's going to exist. So the next thing that is really important is the ability to audit and ensure that the amount of Bitcoin that exists is backed by something, right? So, for example, back when we had commodity-backed currencies with the gold or silver standard, for example, you could almost literally go and check, okay, this country has this many dollars floating around in bills. These are backed by this much gold. It literally described that. Well, that's no longer the case with these fiat currencies, that have come about. And Bitcoin attempts to go back to that. It, in fact, very successfully goes back to that. But
I just want to interject real quickly. I've heard actually described it, and it makes total sense. What backs a lot of the dominant currencies today, I mean, US being the world reserve currency, is the military, right? It's not the faith and the trust in the currency per se, but it's basically the military might of the US government that actually backs, because as you were saying, that obviously we've seen people's purchasing power and everything they provide in society. So I've used this in my own personal descriptive way to tell other people, like, everything that you make, and the reason why you're not seeing savings anymore is because it's being greatly eroded through inflation based on central planning and having a central bank that can devalue that through quantitative easing as well. Quantitative easing to me is just a fancy way of saying we're printing a buttload of money. We're counterfeiting a lot of money. And if you produce something falsely, which is not based on genuine demand, if you just print money, well, that as with anything, you're devaluing its worth. And when you're devaluing, it's not that I'm not necessarily concerned about, devaluing necessarily something that a central bank has manipulation over. But what matters to me is the fact that all of us rely on fiat currencies as our means to go out and buy our groceries, to put a roof over our head, right? So that means they're devaluing everything. And that money that we provide comes from everything that we provide in society. So all that we build, we produce, our intellect and our labor. So that's to me the big problem today, like I say, with and you're kind of alluding to, is severing any tie with any tangible commodity. Is now the central planners basically have the ability to manipulate and dictate what your labor and what your intellectual capacities or the resources you bring to the table, what it's actually worth. And that, like I say, no matter who you are, who would ever think at any point in time that someone should have the ability to arbitrarily dictate or decide what you're worth?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you said it really, really well. Further to that, I mean, one of the things that kind of dawned on me as I started to understand, micro and macroeconomics and monetary policy was that when I'm holding a $5 bill, I'm not actually specifically holding something that's of direct value. I'm holding something that's supposed to promise, at least once upon a time.
Right. Yeah.
That I could go to, to the government and say, here's a piece of paper give me my $5 worth of gold. That's literally what it meant. And in fact, if you look at some of the earlier bills that existed in North America, it actually said that this is a note that gives the bearer access to, you know, whatever the value was. So that was what was the standard. And to me, that's what gave currency a purpose, is it's actually always tied to something that's physically or even non-physically rare and auditable, that is of value, right? And that's why a Big Mac today or an hour of my work today has a certain defined value. And now that's completely free floating, because the stuff that you're paying me with can be printed just like making, you know, whatever else it is at will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that to me, like that, and that is a big issue. So to me, whether you're young or old or anyone in between, is at the very least, you want some way, because, you know, we all like, and when I think about all the, not just the innovation, but the creativity, and all the entrepreneurs have done so many things over hundreds of years during the, you know, even just the industrial revolution, never mind, you know, the technological revolution that we're currently undergoing, but think of how much people have brought to the table. So when I see, you know, things such as the consumable goods, when you're talking about the staples in particular in our countries, you know, look at what would possess anyone to believe that, you know, whether it's your rent or whether it's the bread you buy at the grocery, why would you ever think that that would even make sense? That something that has had, at least a loaf of bread is a perfect example. Why would you think that a loaf of bread should cost 5 times more today to produce than what it was, you know, maybe 50, 60 years ago? I mean, obviously that, even for someone that doesn't have much economic understanding, whether it's in the micro or the macro aspect, at the very least, even just someone that's just the lowest thinking person in terms of economics, surely you understand, based on all the modern innovations and technological advancements, it should be pretty easy to produce a loaf of bread at a much, much lower cost for the end consumer than what you could do 50, 60 years ago. So to me, that's the one thing that I think people need to take away is, I'm not saying that you should, and we're all going to understand as well as this gentleman does, you know, blockchain technology or Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, but at the very least, I mean, you've got to question just what is the underlying fundamentals of the fiat currencies and their ability to, like I say, make a loaf of bread cost 5, maybe 10 times more than it did, when we know how much easier or readily available to have a loaf of bread is in our country. I mean, that's not a loaf of bread. If you took things proper in terms of economic or micro or macroeconomics, or even in the micro level as far as finances, you know darn well a loaf of bread for the, you know, you put your dollar into your wallet, a loaf of bread today shouldn't cost any more than 10, 15 cents. And that's the problem with fiat currencies, is they have the ability to, you know, increase through inflation the cost of these things. And then they think they can just do, I always use the excuse of the dog chasing his tail. Then they'll turn around and what? People will demand higher mandatory minimum wages. So the government once again steps in as the final arbiter, dictate your wages. But every time we've seen that happen, I've watched it since I was a teenager. Wages in terms of minimum wage has gone up probably 3 times since I was a teenager. But yet everything, all the costs of all the consumable goods is actually not only stayed at pace in terms of inflation, actually got more expensive. So you're talking about food in your belly, housing, or the fuel or the energy you consume. You know, all those amazing innovations and technological advancements has not actually benefited anyone except the people that, once again, have the pigs at the trough or have their hands in the bureaucratic purse, which gets to manipulate and dictate the value. They get the money, you know, when it does have tangible value. By the time it trickles down to the rest of us, well, it's not worth shit anymore, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, you bring up some fantastic points there. I mean, you know, you're right. I mean, a loaf of bread should not be costing more, strictly speaking. And when we say cost, let's just for the moment not look at dollars. Let's just look at work, energy, whatever it is, physics, right? And math and science. It's not costing more now than it did before. No. In fact, it might be less because of all the technologies we have, all the automation, all that stuff. So arguably, it's at least no more than it was 50 years ago. Might be less, yet it's going up. So what gives? Well, I mean, ultimately, to me, and looking at this mathematically, you're paying for it with something called a dollar. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, what is a dollar? I mean, it used to once upon a time mean something. Yeah. It doesn't. No. And if it's just floating around like a moving target, well, of course, prices are going to go into some direction. And you keep printing more of it. Well, it's no longer as scarce. You know, it's it's pretty simple, as you said, even to someone who's not in an economics background, to understand that if you just keep printing these like they have no value, the guy selling you the bread's going to say, well, wait a minute. Come on, there's 10 times more of these floating around. I want more of them now. And you know what else? I got to pay more now for the flour.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense. Printing money more and more and more without any regard is just, it's absurd. It's just violating principles that even someone with basic common sense would understand.
Well, I'm humble and I have enough humility to acknowledge that the reason why things such as gold and silver had especially gold, 5,000 years of continuity in terms as a means or a measure or a retention of value is by sheer fact that it's one of those commodities, and there's on the elemental scale or whatever, there's like, I forget how many elements on them, but basically it was one of the few tangible commodities that does have that ability to prevent this kind of thing. Now, of course, the Romans tried using mixing tungsten in, but once again, that was an easy way to measure that, because you could melt it down, you'd find, okay, this isn't pure gold, right? But that's the reason why gold, that people don't understand historical precedent, why gold's been used for 5,000 plus years, is because it was a proper mechanism, that had that ability to be used as a medium of exchange, a measure of your value, and a medium to retain that value, because once again, you can't destroy it. Even if your house goes up in flames, and it might not look to be in the particular mold, right? If it was a necklace, let's say, or whatever, it might look totally different. It might be just a pile of gold, but it's still going to retain that same kind of value by sheer fact that it's a tangible commodity that can be used for multiple applications, and not just as currency. All that. That's one thing that gave gold such an amazing capacity to be a measure and a medium of exchange. And today, as we see, gold is used not just for, say, oh, look, it's shiny. It's used in a multitude of things. So it actually retains its value in a myriad of ways. So that's, to me, what we should get to people to understand is we need something, and Bitcoin seems to have all those things built in. It's just that we can do it in a much, today, obviously, you're not going to be carrying around just like your loonies and toonies. I'm not a big fan of even carrying around those, and those are still based and entrenched on commodities or resources that aren't worth much at all. But I'm saying, rather than and I'm not saying to turn away from gold or silver or other mediums of exchange or retention of value, but the beautiful thing about blockchain technology and the cryptocurrencies that are now using that underlying structure is, my goodness, in the modern age that we live in, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm so happy to see that there are a myriad of companies actually out there that are now putting their best foot forward and using these blockchain technologies, and they're early adopters. So I'm glad that they've taken that onus on themselves, that personal responsibility, say that we know what the future is going to entail, and we're going to do it now. It's like I say, and people that are a little bit concerned, like, it's not going to work out beneficial to everyone, because people are still going to try to find ways to game structures or systems. But the beautiful thing about these blockchain technologies, as far as I understand, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong, is there's no way it's built and based on, from what I understand anyways, but I'm still a noob, so hopefully you can correct me in this. But as far as I understand, this is all based on 256 AES encryption technology, which means all the supercomputers on the planet, you're not going to manipulate that. It's a ledger, just like when you go to the bank, the thing that you use as your third-party intermediary is the bank. And the only reason why you do that is because you trust that institution, right? Well, now we can even with the underlying blockchain, although once again, maybe I'm getting a little further away from the Bitcoin aspect of it, but all that technology that's underlying that structure and that ledger that's built in, that is the way to hold each of us. So whether you're exchanging your Bitcoin or you're just using it as a means to be your third-party intermediary, right? At the very premise of these blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies is, like I say, a way to make sure nobody has the ability to game the system. So that's as fair and equitable as I could possibly hope for in terms of if we're going to retain and measure proper values for all the things that we produce.
Absolutely. And you bring up some good points. I have so much to talk about, but let me kind of just start with one of the things that comes up from what you're saying. A lot of people think that Bitcoin and the blockchain are really about payments and transferring money, so I can say pay you for something I need to pay you. It's not really just about payments. It's about having a universal database or ledger that nobody can go in and change or modify. It's append only. What does that mean? It means that once I write something to it, it's there forever. This has an enormous amount of applications. Obviously, from the standpoint of security, it uses the very same security the military uses, the same security the banks use. But furthermore, the Bitcoin blockchain is backed not by just a single bank that, could get hacked. And you've heard about hacks. We hear about them all the time. Yep. It's backed by every computer on the blockchain, thousands and thousands of computers, none of them sitting in one place. So think about it. If you wanted to actually violate and hack the blockchain, you would have to be able to, breach an undaunting number of resources. And, if you look at it from just the amount of energy and power required to break into Bitcoin, a lot of people basically say that, look, if you actually found a computer fast enough to break into Bitcoin and you were able to expend that much energy and resources, it would be worth your while to contribute to Bitcoin as a miner because you'd make more money doing that.
Right.
It's incredibly lucrative. So all logic and rationale points to the fact that, the network, the Bitcoin network is beyond reproach from a hackability standpoint. And beyond Bitcoin payments, which I'd like to talk about further in this call, but beyond that, it brings up, some very interesting things. If you look at, for example, the finance industry in North America, especially the United States, it's grown to, 8 to 10% of the GDP in the last, 100 years. That wasn't the case at one point. And that's because it has become so difficult to do things with money, with insurance, stock trading, managing of securities, banking. You have to go through all these third parties, these middlemen, and you have to go through regulatory, and that's overhead. It's expensive, it's slow, and it ultimately is no longer efficient. These machines are in place to control people. Let's be very clear about it. I mean, I believe in it anyways, that people's liberty and control of people is not guided by judicial processes. No. It's not really guided by the military or police. It's guided by the control of money. That's how governments control people. That's ultimately how it all comes down to. These other things we talk about, they're means in a society where the government can actually literally apply that control, but ultimately it all boils down to money. It's actually been the cause of most of the wars that we can think about in recent history. It all came down to money. So it's definitely important to understand that money is really one of the ways that governments prevent people from having liberty. And as a libertarian, that's why money is such a forefront thing on the forefront, which is why I think Bitcoin is so vastly under discussed, especially in libertarian circles, but just in general.
I agree. And you know what? That's the thing. And I can only speak for myself. I won't speak for anyone else, but I only like to talk about things that I know that I have general knowledge in, because one thing I don't want to do, and because like I say, I recognize my own fallibility, is to confuse and confound people, because I recognize there's a lot of people already doing that. So the last thing I want to do is say anything or put my foot in my mouth. So I'm going to try to even just ask you questions, because you seem to be more knowledgeable on this stuff. So this whole thing, remember when the whole Mount Gox thing unfolded, right? I'm just curious, and based on from what I read, so just so you can help me so that I know that my own knowledge is correct, from what I understand is it was an exchange or somewhere. So basically what you're doing in those situations is you're using, your cryptocurrency, but you're using their infrastructure, their servers, as a means to store your blockchain or your Bitcoin or your cryptocurrencies. Now, to me, what I kind of understand, I only have, like I say, Bitcoin. I've only had a few donations in terms of my channel. Unfortunately, like I said, I wasn't wise enough, and I'll admit that I wasn't wise enough to invest early. So I'm a late adopter. I recognize that. Bad shame on me. Right? I'm sorry for that. But the people that have, I've seen that it's a great way. But to me, it's like I have such a minimal amount. It's like I don't mind keeping it in my Bitcoin wallet per se in terms of online. But if I had a genuine, a decent storage of Bitcoins, I might want to use like a USB removable device. That way, if you're not plugged into any computer, like if I store my Bitcoin wallet or whatever in an offline device, then that to me would be safe. But if you're storing it in something like, from what I understand, this Mt. Gox, you were storing it on someone else's server. Now, not that they could actually steal your Bitcoin per se, because once again, I think that underlying technology in terms of encryption will make sure that they're never going to get full access to it. But they could still, because they're the ones that have the server and have saved your keys and all that stuff, they're the ones that now have access or control over it. So to me, that's no different as far as I'm concerned. Now, correct me once again if I am wrong, but that's no different than like if I gave my neighbor my wallet, right? It's like probably not a good idea, right? But correct me if I'm wrong there, because I think I'm just in case, right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, you know what? That's a really great question, because a lot of people, and actually, unfortunately, the media, when they report that something like Mt. Gox happened,
right,
the problem is they don't properly define, either intentionally or unintentionally, they don't properly define what failed.
Right.
That's the problem. And when people read Mt. Gox, it's actually really frustrating to me when people read this, is they go, well, Bitcoin's is not secure. And I go, no, actually, you're not. Unfortunately, the problem is the news didn't report what really happened. And let's talk about Mt. Gox. Right. Mt. Gox is your neighbor. It's your neighbor. And he's saying, hey, come and store your Canadian dollars physically, your bills. Give them to me. I'll keep them in a box in my house. And don't worry, I'll be here tomorrow morning and you can convert it to whatever you want. Now, tomorrow morning, you go and you see that he emptied his house. Yeah. Well, come on. I mean, that doesn't really mean the Canadian dollar is not secure.
Right.
You trusted someone with your Canadian dollars and they vanished. And look, Bitcoin is not going to go and solve every problem under the sun. Bitcoin itself was never violated. There's never been a hack of Bitcoin since it was created in 2009. Every exchange out there, every hack that you hear about there has come down to generally somebody trusted someone else, or they trusted a device or whatever, something. Right. And, you know, it was a misplaced trust and it got violated. And that's what really happened. Mt. Gox had a web server that was storing people's Bitcoin. And I won't go into the specific details, but basically when you're telling Mt. Gox to store your money, you're actually literally handing them your wallet, your money. You're not giving them your password or anything. You're actually transferring your money out of your wallet into their wallet. And they're holding it in their wallet. And all they're doing is they're saying, look, I promise you that I got your $50 and I'll give it to you whenever you want it. But it's physically in their pocket.
Yeah. Well, that's I'm glad you clarified that, because I think that even for my own self, and I had to do a whole lot of extra research after that, make sure before I even was comfortable to even talk about it, make sure I at least thought I was quasi knowledgeable on the subject. And thanks for helping me out there, because like I said, last thing I want to do is give people the wrong information. But yeah, so basically, of course, so personal responsibility. I mean, no matter what you're going to use as a medium exchange or to measure, you're going to have to be personally responsible in that way, and that's just wise and prudent. So at least thanks for clarifying. So some of the people that are in the chat realize that no, it's not that these cryptocurrencies, like I say, I think the people that set these things up did a really excellent job, and obviously were much wiser than I am in terms of computer science and stuff, but they understood these things, and that's why they did it in such a manner. Some people say it was one guy, right? Nagasaki, or whatever, or whoever, but either way, no matter who it was that created, but at the end of the day, it's definitely a medium, not just to make sure that people are held to accountable, but there's no way for anyone to actually gain the system if you're wise and prudent. Now today, like no matter how wise, like I can lock up my dollar. That's the thing, just so give people something to think about in their head. I could lock up $100 bill in my safe, right? And my safe could be 3 feet thick, right? The most impenetrable steel or whatever. But at the end of the day, if the government has the ability to devalue what's that worth just by simple fact, what we say, the old law of supply and demand, right? By just printing the stuff and destroying its purchasing power, just like, I mean, Zimbabwe was a perfect example of that. Well, then when I do go to take that $100 bill out of my safe, it's still going to be there. The problem is with government fiat currencies is they have the ability, they don't have to reach in and take that dollar out at all. They can completely manipulate what that $100 bill is going to be worth by simple fact of printing it into oblivion, or like what the European Union or the ECB has said. And Draghi, he said years ago, and he wasn't bullshitting, right? He's saying, listen, we'll do whatever is necessary. They'll print money from now until, and you know, the worst part about it is normally That would be a great way to matter of fact, the euro would have been destroyed years ago. But the problem is with all these central bankers, they all realize the only way this system, this scheme works properly is if everyone kind of works in conjunction with each other, which is what a lot of these big G20 meetings and stuff are. It's all about central planners and central bankers making sure that they're not gaming the system at too much of a disadvantage for everyone else. Because once again, the minute one company or one central bank tries to take advantage and game the system, well, everyone else, it's that race to the bottom. Then we're all in Zimbabwe land at that point, right? So what they've been doing, as far as I'm concerned, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, is they've been kind of manipulate the destruction of the value of our currency so that it's that death by 1,000 cuts, or the boiling frog effect. So we're not going to feel it right away, but given enough time, 100% devaluation of your currency means you're broke, right? Might take a while to get there, but you're still going to end up broke eventually.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you lock up your money in the best safe, as you just said, $100, you might as well put termites in with it and let it get eaten up. Because I mean, the government, as you said, they don't have to reach in there and do that. They're all the central planning, with these countries. That's exactly it. And this is kind of leading into the whole conversation of politics and the fact that politicians are aware of the fact that the election process, the campaigning process is ultimately it comes down to the voter. Right. Yeah. Manipulating voters, giving them false promises. And, voters, unfortunately, I don't think they have long-term memories. That's reality. No. And it's really about the short-term gains. It's not about the long-term gains. If I go in as a politician, and by the way, I'm running in the upcoming federal election.
You are?
Yes.
Who are you running for? So you're in Canada then, right?
Yes, I'm running in.
You're in BC, you said, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so is it Libertarian Party?
Yeah, I'm running with the Libertarian Party of Canada. Yeah, I got accepted as a candidate just last week. And I'm running in U.S. Burnaby. So I'll be on the ballot this 21st of October.
Awesome. Well, I'll just say before you even continue on is I'm a huge fan of Tim Moen and the Libertarian Party. I wish you all the best, man. But my thing is obviously the Libertarian Party is just, it's not the marketing. There's not much in terms of traction. That's the problem with living in a democracy. We have to rely on everyone else getting up to speed, right? But I wish you all the best. The problem, obviously, as you're probably recognizing early on, is the Libertarian Party. As much as I've even tried myself to talk about them, and like I say, I'm a big fan of Tim Moen, and I've got a lot of friends from the Libertarian Party. It's just that most people don't even know they exist, and the media. And the reason why they do that, obviously, is the media. They don't want anyone to understand that there are people that are genuinely this much about defending freedom, because big government proponents don't want to advertise that there are people that are going to give you a better way of doing things, because the central planners and the bureaucrats, well, they realize that that's going to shoot them in the foot. That's why this Libertarian Party, I don't know if you're familiar with Ron Paul. Even Ron Paul, he's a great guy. He was a great statesman in the U.S., but even he realized after 1988 when he tried to run on the Libertarian Party of the U.S., and the Libertarian Party in the U.S. is even much bigger than the Libertarian Party of Canada is, without the marketing, without some way to get your voice out there to get access to bully pulpit, good luck getting your message out there. Now, fortunately today we are, and not saying that we've gotten as far as like getting support for people like yourself or the Libertarian Party, but based on PPC, another party that has a leader, Maxime Bernier, he's libertarian leaning. So at the very least, we are seeing a party that is still a representative, somewhat, he was an establishment guy, but we are seeing the term libertarian talked about a lot today in comparison and contrast. I know just 10 years ago, I was one of the few Canadians that even would use the term libertarian, right? And most people are like, what the hell is a libertarian? One thing I will say about today and having people like Maxime step up to the stage and use the term libertarian is it's getting the message out there. And that's, I think the Libertarian Party ultimately at the end of the day, well, I've always said, we're all libertarians, most of us anyways at our core. It's just that most people haven't adopted that psychologically, because a lot of the people that are the rulers, whether it's authoritarian mommy or daddy, they want to keep you under the thumb. A libertarian is someone that say, no, I want to grow up and be an adult someday, right? Mm-hmm. Apparently Canada, most of them anyways, they're not ready to put the big boy and girl pants on yet. So I guess right now we're in that middle ground where the PBC is at least we're trying to lead the horse to the water kind of thing.
Well, people want to give off the perception to others and to themselves that they're responsible and they're wearing the big boy pants, and they don't want a nanny telling them what to do. They want the perception of that. But the reality is, when it comes down to voting and making tough decisions, that, oh my God, I have to be responsible for everything or most things. When that comes down, it's fear, uncertainty, doubt. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No. And unfortunately, that's a bit of a leap. And one of the challenges with a libertarian brand, at least here in Canada, I won't speak for the Americans, is we often come in with ideologies that are, I think, logically and rationally 100% sound. As a scientist, I can't really justify anything other than libertarianism. It's the most natural, valid state for any person to be in. But the problem is, we have been indoctrinated, and myself included, when I was going through the schooling system in university, I've been indoctrinated with various things. And, many politicians, good and bad, over the last 200 years have said that if you repeat something enough times, people will believe it. And that's what's going on. So, yeah, I mean, you look at what's going on right now with them. They are trying to keep the libertarian word out. People hear about libertarians. They think, at least when I was getting my nominations, they sometimes tie us to the liberals because they hear the word liber and they think that means liberal. They sometimes think we're related to the Americans, which I actually don't relate to the American libertarians in general. There's a lot of things I don't agree with, which is a separate conversation. But I'll comment about the PPC. They actually did an article on my views on the PPC here.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this. Yes, I think that they stole a lot of our thunder. And, if you're looking at this from the standpoint that I'm Colgate and you're Crest, and I want to get Colgate out there as a brand, yeah, sure, it might be a hit to us in the gut. I don't look at it this way. I mean, I'm a libertarian and I'm a member of this party because I want liberty. I don't really give a damn whether it's branded PPC. I don't give a damn if the NDP tomorrow comes along and Mr. Singh says, you know what, screw all that NDP stuff, libertarianism, let's go in. I don't care. I want liberty to get in. And to be completely practical, I would love to win a seat this election. I don't practically necessarily expect it to happen. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just dealing with reality. But, I do love that Max has come in, and what he has done is, in my opinion, brought libertarian values. Whether it's called libertarianism, I don't care. He has brought libertarian values to the forefront. They're talking about it in the news. He just got on the debates. I am thrilled that Mr. Bernier is going to be on there with Justin Trudeau and these other guys that I just completely am at odds with in terms of what they discuss. He's going to go on there. And you know what? Furthermore, I don't know Mr. Bernier. I don't know if he's truly a libertarian. I don't know if he's just a sour conservative that started a party because, he wasn't happy being a CPC, without the leadership. But I don't care. You know what? If he's achieving a goal, great. And honestly, I look at them as paving the way perhaps for liberty, which is what I want. So, you know what? All the power to them. I am going to stand by my party. We do have principles that I completely am aligned with. I'm aligned with Tim and, the PPC, like I said, sometimes you need to have something with a little more teeth to get in the front door. Yeah.
Well, I'll even agree 100% on not just everything you said, but I'll even add from my own perspective. And because me and Tim were talking in a stream I did not too long ago, is I always said, Tim, I love and respect you as a man, but that's why as a libertarian, I've even said this and to his face even, but he understands this, is libertarians make the worst politicians because libertarians are far too principled to play a political game. And today, the kind of structure that we're living in is you got to be willing to lie, cheat, and steal, right? Basically, and buy people's votes, which tells me that no wonder libertarians never achieve much success in terms of politics because they're far too principled, which is why, like what you were kind of alluding to is, yes, stay true to your principles, Tim. I don't ever want to see Tim ever say that, okay, screw sticking to my principles. Now I'm just going to turn to populism. The reason why I have so much respect for Tim is because he sticks true to his principles. So just because you're not winning in the game of politics, actually that tells me that you're the guy that's keeping your nose above the shit, right? So stay there, Tim. You stay there, Neeraj, or anyone, like I say, that's part of the Libertarian Party. As a matter of fact, I hope we never get to the point where we have to genuinely have libertarians running politics. I hope libertarians will change the culture to the point where the government will be so small, we'll be like, oh yeah, that's right too. There's this thing we call government, isn't it? Right? That's my dystopian future. I hope for someday, is just that we all recognize that at our core, we're libertarians. Most of us human beings are libertarians. We just want to have a live, let live mentality, treat each people how we would like to be treated, respect people's sovereignty, all those beautiful aspects of libertarian philosophy. But one thing, like you were saying, and I'm going to say too, is at the very least, we're getting a lot of Canadians, and I'm seeing it now. It's so rampant. I would have never even thought 4 or 5 years ago that Canadians, Americans, yes, I knew Americans were all conducive to accepting and adopting libertarian values and principles, because it goes all the way back to their founding fathers. It's baked in the cake in their culture. Canada, not so much, but I'm very happy to see, because we are one of those places, not just geographically positioned above the U.S., but because of our history coming from, fleeing some of the oppression of the European monarchs, is, I think, and living in a northern country where you kind of almost got to learn a little bit of self-reliance and all. I think we are perfectly suited as a country, as a culture, that libertarians should perfectly be something that we should all be willing to adopt. The only thing that I think has restrained or contained that so far is the media and the ruling class, that don't want anyone in Canada to understand what it is to be truly free. They want us to still keep thinking, well, we need government to take care of us somehow, right? That's or the people that want to be your thought leaders or your rulers, they want you to always think that you'll never be able to do anything without their help and their assistance. Blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies is just one area that's greatly happened. And once again, we don't have to go through a revolution. I love using this too. I've coined the phrase, and I use it all the time, is I prefer an intellectual evolution than a revolution, because a revolution, well, you're just going to end up back at the same point in a revolution. That's literally what it suggests. Whereas an evolution, which is what blockchain and Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies, at least in terms of economic transactions or interactions, well, that's a way to get out from underneath central planning, right? That's a way to remove the gun from the equation entirely without having to pick it up yourself. You just ignore it away.
Absolutely. And going back to the kind of Bitcoin topic, Bitcoin and blockchain, as I said before, it's not about me being able to pay Bob. It's really about this decentralized means. And what does that mean by decentralized? It's the opposite of what our governments are doing. They're centralized. Right. They're aligned with special interest groups and corporations, and their goal, even though they're campaigning that they're supporting the people, their goal is to ensure status quo and just give the illusion that things are going to change, which is why things don't change. People keep voting for the same thing over and over again. The thing that is happening with Bitcoin, if I may, Bitcoin to me is one of the most disruptive inventions to economics that has happened, at least in the last century, in my opinion. But it's not just payments and economics; it's also sociological reasons. And I'll tell you why. If I go and I post something on a social network right now, let's say I'm Edward Snowden, I post something somewhere, something that the government doesn't like or indirectly doesn't like, I could be prosecuted for it, I could be persecuted for it, and my information could be removed. The blockchain ensures that free speech is guaranteed. Yeah. If I go onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and I can tell you that I've written messages like, go Oilers go on the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm a big Edmonton fan. I wrote that back in 2013. I can go back and look at that. It's 2019 now. It's still sitting there 6 years later, and there is no force that can remove it. And think about that for a moment. I can put anything I want on there. I can put anything that disrupts government. I could put something on there that could change the way of thinking. I mean, I know I'm exaggerating, but you get where I'm going with this. I mean, it's about the expression of ideas and the fact that nobody can stop you from expressing your ideas. And these are the fundamentals to the liberty concepts that I think all of us fundamentally really want to believe in.
Oh, I agree 100%. And most people, like I say, no matter where they come from, I talk to people that identify as liberal or conservative, and at the end of the day, they all have the same gripes. Really, what it comes down to is people want to come up with their, and actually a lot of them don't come up with their own ideas. They just regurgitate the ideas passed down to them by their thought leaders or opinion makers, and how you get it from underneath this. Blockchain is saying, like, we don't, once again, it's decentralized. You don't have to decide all by yourself how everything's supposed to play out for everyone else. You just take your part and parcel and say that I want to make sure that no one has the ability to dictate how I play out my economic transaction, allow everyone else to do the same thing. And once again, that means we have the ability to be sovereign individuals once again. And at the end of the day, like I say, I don't care where you are on either side of the political equation, you know you want freedom. Every one of you want freedom. So rather than asking a central planner to give you a one-size-fits-all approach every 4 years, then yeah, adopt some of these amazing technologies that blockchain or Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies introduced, and use that as your means. That's the way to get your voice out there. That's a means to make sure that you are decentralized and you have the capacity and the ability to do what you want to do and what's beneficial to you, and to retain some of that. Like my personal thing I say to people is, even though I'm not as conducive in knowledge as Neeraj, is that how you pronounce Neeraj?
The Neeraj or Neeraj.
Okay, Neeraj, okay. I'm not as smart as Neeraj is in terms of this stuff, but at the very least, I know that there's that option available to me to decentralize and at least hedge against all of the things that government is using to destroy the purchasing power of the fiat currency I use in Canada. So to me, like, whether you got a hedge in terms of using gold or silver or some of these blockchain technologies in terms of cryptocurrencies, it's not just a way like he was suggesting in terms of retaining that value, but you can some people that want to set up a healthcare. Perfect example. Well, I guess not necessarily the cryptocurrency, but the underlying aspect of the cryptocurrency. If you want to have something is in terms of a healthcare system in this country, and everyone's held, properly to account for all the economic transaction, well, the underlying structure of these cryptocurrencies, that blockchain, is a best practice way of doing that, and it'll allow everyone to make sure that we can have services provided to us that doesn't come through that central planning model or big government that can dictate and control all that. We could have our healthcare system set up under a blockchain type of ledger. We could have banking. I mean, the banksters, well, they're actually trying their best to get out in front and adopt cryptocurrencies because they realize that their entire business model is now like, it's basically like the banking system of the old has basically now been relegated to being an Irishman scooping horse shit back in the early 1900s. It's like, it's not going to last for much longer, folks, because there's no longer a need or a necessity to have that third-party intermediary.
Absolutely.
You can completely remove that out of the equation entirely and go straight peer-to-peer, or consumer to producer, or consumer to salesman. That's all. It's all straight exchanges now. And once again, because it all deals with underlying encrypted technology, is you can hold each other to account. Nobody can manipulate that. So the bankers are probably sweating. That's the reason why they're trying to adopt some of these blockchain technologies, because they realize if they don't get out in front of it, well, their entire business model ceases to exist in short time.
They're trying to future-proof themselves. I mean, I work with a lot of these companies, banks, insurance companies in Asia and in North America, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to get an understanding of these technologies, but they haven't really gone all in. And the fact of the matter is they are losing sleep. And I'll tell you why. Because as we already discussed, Bitcoin and blockchain is not about just payments. It's about this global ledger of information that can never be changed. And if you think about it, the Bitcoin is a tiny part of it. Yes, it does record the fact that I sent you some Bitcoin, and that's beyond reproach. Now you have that Bitcoin, and we've just made a payment, right? But it's not just about that. I mean, I could build a stock exchange on it. Stock exchanges are built on there.
Yep.
You know how much money it takes to do an IPO? What if a mom and pop shop wants to just do a little mini $50,000 IPO? They can't do that. I mean, this entire infrastructure, and I just gave a tiny example, blocks proper economic growth. And it's only there. It's there to ensure that the incumbent big guys that are running the show, making all the decisions, keep doing that tomorrow. Because the barriers to entry are there. Blockchain is shattering all of that. These barriers to entry are being torn down. You're going to be able to trade. And I'm talking in the future. These things are still being built. But I foresee insurance companies, stock trading, all sorts of financial securities, mortgages. These things are all coming in the pipe. They're right now in early phases, but they can all be done with these third parties left out. And if you think about what I said earlier, where 8% of the GDP is just being spent in meaningless overhead for all these third parties that are doing all that value is going to come back. It's going to come back to the people. Those people, those large glass buildings that you see in New York City or in Toronto, where these bankers are, capturing value, that money is going to come back to the people that worked hard to earn that. And that's what that's literally what these technologies are going to do, is because anybody could run their own IPO. They could start getting access to capital. They can grow, and those disparities between the poor and the wealthy are going to start equate. And I'm not. And by the way, just to be clear, as a libertarian, let me just say, I'm not trying to equalize things. I'm not trying to force equality. What I'm trying to do is give people the right to have an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's what I think it is. It's not the right to wealth. And I think most of the parties, and this is kind of going off Bitcoin, but most of the parties, especially in Canada, even the right-leaning ones, they want to give the impression that everyone has the right to wealth. No, they have the right to pursue it with equal opportunity.
Right.
That's what they have the right to do. And what I don't like as a libertarian are policies that prevent people that have worked hard and have they should have that opportunity. And I see Bitcoin and blockchain really flattening that out. And that's terrifying the powers that be. It really is. It fascinates me. I mean, I love seeing it. I want to see these things happening. This is why I started my company.
Well, and like I say, before we do end up tying this up, anything you want, send to me in that email, and I'll place all the links, because I definitely want everyone to get access to as much information as possible from you. But I want to ask you too, maybe help explain to people, because when you kind of were saying earlier that in terms of, it allows you to exchange and all. People, I think one of the concern I've heard a lot of people say is, if there's a built-in ledger, well, then they know who's doing everything. But in reality, hopefully, now, like I say, I won't be able to explain nearly as well as you will, so that's why I'm going to default to you. But from what I understand is all you have is the address in terms of the Bitcoin wallet or whatever, but you have there's nothing where anyone can see like your personal address, your name. It's just, it's decentralized to the point where the ledger makes sure that both of the transactions or either people on either side of the transactions are held to account, right? That's the point of the ledger system. But the ledger isn't it's not like someone's going to be able to appear and say, oh, look, Bennett Hunter at blah, blah, blah address with this phone. So can you kind of help clarify that for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't want to start sounding like I'm being cliched, but again, it's all about liberty and making choices. And right. You're right. Bitcoin and blockchain and any blockchain, they don't specifically record my name or your name anywhere. If I send you a Bitcoin,
right,
think of my address, my Bitcoin identity as XYZ. It doesn't point to me at all. And yours might be ABC. Right. Nobody knows you are ABC. They don't know your email address. They know nothing about you. You're just an identity somewhere on the blockchain, and I'm another identity. So if I sent it to you, yes, the nice thing is it's on a ledger, and 15 months from now, you can go and look at that. You can know I sent you that Bitcoin. You could also know that maybe I sent you a copy of the title deed to the house that you bought from me for that Bitcoin. And now you can prove in court that, hey, wait a minute, I am ABC, he's XYZ. We signed an off-chain contract. It's written on paper, but I have a proof here that 15 months ago, he sold that house to me, and the blockchain proves it. So it's as private as you want it to be. It's as not private as you want it to be.
Right,
so
exactly.
You get to decide. I mean, if you want to tell people you're XYZ, go for it. If you don't want to, then don't. It's like that. If I may, there's one big thing I wanted to clarify that I kind of went off. How much time do we have?
Oh, no, you have as much time as you want, man. There's no time limit here, buddy.
Oh, well, you better be careful with that.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that kind of prompted me to talk about Bitcoin in the first place was this whole thing that even the most stalwart libertarians don't understand. Okay, so, I was saying that, in order for it to have value, there's two things. It has to be rare. It has to be tied to something that's rare. Why did gold take on this place backing money in the first place? It's because you got to mine it. It's really, really hard to find. And more or less, other than some things like the Klondike Gold Rush and the California Gold Rush, the amount of gold in circulation doesn't change very much. Right. It's kind of going up. Maybe it's sometimes people lose gold, but it doesn't really change very much. And that's why people at one point decided, you know what, I'm not going to buy a loaf of bread with an ounce of gold that I'm carrying around in my pocket. I'm going to go to this thing called a bank, and I'll give them my gold, and they'll give me a nice piece of paper that they signed and said, this is worth 1 ounce of gold. And now I can give that to you, and you give me my bread. But really, does anybody actually go in and ever claim the gold? No, nobody does. I mean, when's the last time you took well, we don't have the gold standard, but even if we did, you wouldn't go back to the bank and say, give me my gold. You don't care. So the cool thing about these notes, which we call currency, is you can walk around, trade them, and you know, of course, the banks got smart. They got centralized. They're like, hey, wait a minute. You know all that gold that's in the vault? Why don't we just like do fractional reserve now and start lending it up 10 times or something? Which is why there's so much more money out there than there's any gold. I mean, I don't even know how much gold there is anymore. So it's gotten out of whack, and that's another conversation. But the main point is the gold standard was something I absolutely believe in. The Libertarians, at least my party, the Libertarian Party Canada, we want to go back to it. And that's a separate topic. But Bitcoin is a way for us to go back to a standard without waiting for the damn politicians to do it. It's a way for us to do it without waiting for my party or some other party that believes in the gold standard. Bitcoin is backed. And so I'm going to go into the next topic is, how do you audit it? I mean, people ask me all the time, and it's a great question. They say, what is this? It's a scam. I mean, where's the gold that's backing it? Like, what is physical about it? I mean, what do I touch and see that I know that Bitcoin has value? And my answer is the work. The work.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't it basically every ledger, isn't it self-auditing basically automatically based on the fact that every transaction is recorded? Isn't that basically self-auditing?
Yes. And it does take, unfortunately or fortunately, like any sort of disruptive, crazy idea. I mean, I'm a pilot. At once upon a time, it was probably heresy to say that human beings could fly around in large planes across the ocean. But now we take it for granted. So these are disruptive changes in our thought process as members of society. And this is where, you know, I try to explain it, and it is challenging. But if you go back to gold, and I'll try to explain it best as possible. Okay. We all know nobody's gone and checked if there's gold sitting in a vault somewhere, even if there was a gold standard. What do we know? We know that dollar bill is backed by gold. So we know that it's backed by something that gets mined and is really, really, really hard to find. Yeah. That's number one. So let's look at Bitcoin now. Side A is gold. Side B is Bitcoin. Side B, is Bitcoin really, really hard to find? Oh, yeah. It's really, really hard to find. Just take my word for it. Yeah. It's also mined and all that. You can't create Bitcoins. So in terms of scarcity, it's absolutely as scarce, if not more scarce. There's a limit. We know there's 21 million Bitcoins. That's not going to change. Now let's move to the next thing, which is the ability to audit it, to make sure that nobody can go and just start printing. You know, you can't print $5 bills in your basement. There's still, the Canadian government is in charge of that, even if they can print it without a gold standard. But the blockchain is auditable. You can look at right now the blockchain every 10 minutes, whenever you want. You can look and see exactly how many Bitcoins have existed since the beginning of time. So you know that if I send you a Bitcoin, you know what its place is. You know how many Bitcoins there are, and its value is not going to fluctuate because of some sort of crazy abundance that happened because somebody printed off more Bitcoins. You can't change that. So when people ask me, well, what is Bitcoin backed by? I go, what is gold? What is your money backed by? Why do you think $10 is worth $10? And they go, well, you know, it's backed by the scarcity the government creates. And I go, yeah, but that, even if that was gold, you know what? You don't actually go and use gold. And let's be real about it. I mean, gold is interesting as jewelry. Why? Because it's rare. People like to wear it to show wealth. It looks beautiful, sure, it glitters, but there's a lot of things that glitter that are cheap. Right. It's valuable. That's why people like to wear rings, like to wear jewelry. They show off their wealth. It has some application in industrial processes, I won't lie. But the fact of the matter is, gold's not bread. It's not electricity. It's not wood. We don't burn it. It's really a holder of value. And the reason it's valuable is because it's really, really hard to find. And that's why we value it, we store it, we protect it in reserve.
And destroy it, for that matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't, like, I can take a whole bunch of those plastic or paper bills, the fiat currency, I can destroy them easily and readily. I could hold a torch to gold all day long. It'll melt. It'll be a puddle on the floor, but it's still going to be there. It's not going anywhere.
That's right.
So it is one of those things, like I say, that has the ability to retain that value, which I think was why it lasted for 5,000 years, and most people realized that it was the only thing that you could safely rely on as being something that someone couldn't easily or readily destroy or devalue. Now, like I said, doesn't mean that everything throughout history has been perfect. Like I said, apparently the Romans in the past tried to devalue it by mixing it with tungsten, I believe it was back in the time or whatever. But once again, that was something you wouldn't have to worry about that today. It's pretty easy to figure out if something can that meets the requirements for what it is. So gold has a particular, like I say, it's on the elemental scale, folks. You can figure that stuff out and test that, make sure it's actually retaining its value, which as it should be. Whereas, yeah, paper or fiat currencies, there's no way for any of us on the other side of that equation to decide that, I want to, like me personally, if I want to save a lot of money and use these fiat currencies, I'd be like, oh, let me stuff it all on my mattress. That's actually what people used to do back in the day. They would have done, like you were even alluding to earlier when you were saying about those paper monies, like the some of those greenbacks, prior to the U.S. Federal Reserve going to the new iteration. But back then, you could stuff as many $20 bills onto your mattress as you wanted, but you knew that bill, you could exchange that for that real tangible gold. Now, it literally said right on the bill that this was exchangeable for real money, which was gold. So there was a way to retain that value. No problem. Today, there's no way to retain your value. It's a constant manipulation. And that's the part that most people understand, which I think is most important. And I kind of already reiterated this, is the central planners, they know how to do it. They know that they're not going to be able to destroy it. We're not going to go through a Zimbabwe moment anytime soon, because if they destroy the purchasing power to that extreme, well, we would all, matter of fact, I would incentivize people to adopt things such as blockchain technology or go back to a gold standard. So they're playing this death by 1,000 cuts. But to me, it's like, I want the unsuspecting victim is, don't wait until that 1,000th cut and you finally bled out, right? That's because at that point in time, it's too late to start worrying about things. Not at that point. Now is, yes, find some way to hedge. You don't have to necessarily have 100% trust in everything. You still might not have figured out, hey, I still don't understand why it's gold. You don't have to understand everything 100% conclusively. I don't think any of us have that intellectual knowledge to be able to figure, but at the very least, that gold. Gold is a perfect example, even without going into blockchain. Go out today and buy yourself an ounce of gold. You'll see it's worth a whole lot more than your $20 100 years ago. It's worth what, $1,600 today. Well, that tells you, look at that. Look at how much. Why is it that gold went from gold didn't change. Gold is just gold. But the reason why it's retained and increased its value, because it's a direct reflection in contrast and comparison to the fiat currencies, right? That was the one thing, that was the one message I think that sent shockwaves around the world when Nixon did take the U.S. off the world reserve currency, is now you can actually see, it was easy to manipulate that stuff for a while, but now you can see quite readily what the detriment was and how much these central planners, these central banks are destroying your purchasing power. When you see that same dollar that you had 20 years ago now isn't even worth what 1/10 of that value, well, you should at least know that somebody's manipulating the value of everything you produce in society. And at the very least, like I say, adopt some way to get out from underneath that stuff. I'm not saying to go to blockchain. I'm not saying to go to Bitcoin. I'm not saying to gold or silver, but I'm saying these are areas. The options are out there. I'm not going to tell you which way to do things. I'm just saying the options are out there. If you want to take advantage of getting out from underneath these kind of central planning schemes that completely devalue what your worth is, what your net worth, what your gross worth is at some point in time, is if you want to hedge against that, then yes, invest in these technologies or alternatives that are at least going to try their best to retain the purchasing power and all that you produce in society.
Yeah, you said it right. It really comes down, to a lot of common sense. You know what? People are buying up gold. You know that China is one of the largest holders of gold. There's a reason for it. They're holding gold because it has value. It has the scarcity, and ultimately scarcity is important. That's how you retain value. Fiat currencies are, every second of the day, they're ticking down in value because they keep printing them out. And this is another conversation, but my understanding is, part of the reason these centralized governments are printing off money is because at the end of the day, they owe their treasury bill holders and blah, blah, blah. They owe debts. Ultimately, right. You don't fight wars without buying debts. Right. And in order to get those debts, you got to pay them back. And if you can't pay them back, because war is not very profitable, what do? Well, you can print off a bunch of money in your basement and send it out. But in order to print that money, you got to get off that damn gold standard to do it. So, it's not a coincidence that these guys have done that. We've had, unfortunately, not a very pleasant 20th century with respect to what happened in the geopolitics of this world, and it led to a domino effect, and that's where we're at. But kind of going back to the Bitcoin thing, Bitcoin meets all the standards of gold. It's rare. You can audit it. It's not going up and down in value in huge numbers. It meets every single requirement that gold had and gold is, as you and I have already agreed upon, a very solid means to retain and hold value, to retain your wealth. You can't do it with fiat. So definitely, Bitcoin is what we're calling the digital gold. And it's really important, I think, for people who are watching this to understand you have to get into this mindset that I don't have to physically see it and it doesn't have to be stored somewhere. As long as it's scarce, cannot be destroyed, cannot be created without hard work, and it can be audited so that there's a proper, fair trail. And of course, and I can engage and trade in it, it is just as valuable as a utility, right? Something for society as gold was. Unfortunately, gold has not got that place in our world economics because of the central powers and what they want.
Yeah. Well, I just even want to reiterate something you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, and in terms of this whole geopolitics and a lot of these wars and strife that's happening around the world. That could be so greatly reduced. Like you say, if we still function on anything remotely resembling, which held big governments and central bankers at bay, was not giving them carte blanche ability to destroy the purchasing power of our currency, and that what we use as a medium of exchange or currency, right? And that's something that's played a key and pivotal role of causing a lot of conflict around the world, is the fact that, yes, fiat currency has allowed people to enslave entire generations of people to pay for wars. That now, even in the past, during monarchs of Europe, actually, one thing I will say, the monarchs of Europe were constrained to a substantial degree compared to today in terms of their foreign or their conflicts with other competing countries or other competing monarchs, is because, once they squandered all the gold, right, all of that wealth that they produced in society, then they realized that was a detriment to them. But today, under fiat currencies, is they've spent, a lot of Western countries or leaders have squandered trillions of dollars, and causing a lot of harm to not just domestic citizens, but a lot of people over the entire planet. Mm-hmm. And they would have never been able to do so, right? That the incentive would have never existed if it wasn't for the fact that they now have that carte blanche ability to just print money to paint over whatever decision they make economically. That's something that plays not just an economic role, but that plays a huge effect in how we interact and engage with each other. The beauty of the free market, the beauty of what the West represented under free market capitalism is you don't want to get into foreign conflicts. Matter of fact, the best thing you can do to create peace in the entire world is to exchange with people all over the planet. That was one of the things the founding fathers of the U.S. understood intrinsically, is to stay away from goddamn conflicts and use trade as your medium, because if you use trade and a proper means to respect each other for what we produce in society, whether you're, like, say, halfway around the world or living in Canada, that's the best way to keep authoritarianism at bay. Treat each other with respect, and don't just use the power of the purse to manipulate or try to dominate the world, which is what fiat currencies are today. Like I say, the military, predominantly, as much as I hate to admit it, the U.S. as a world reserve currency would have already ceased to exist if it wasn't for the fact that they have the most powerful military on the planet. Now, in a way, I'm a little bit glad, because as much as there's lots of evils on the planet, the U.S., at least based on some of the historical precedent, is still pretty powerful, and they have some good messages to send. But once again, we got to stop getting away from just being blindly loyal to nations or governments and being more loyal to ideas and freedom. If we place ideas and liberty at the forefront, then once again, you don't have to worry about this constant conflict, because once again, we have the alternative, we have the options, we have the technology to make sure that we can keep the authoritarians at bay. But most people aren't up to speed in adopting these things because they've been failed in their education system. They've been failed by their thought leaders, their opinion makers, people who represent the media class. A lot of people have failed a lot of people today. So we're in a weird place. I admit this, folks. I don't know all the answers. Neeraj, doesn't have all the answers, but at the very least, we're saying there are methods out there. There are methods. We can try our best to get out from underneath this kind of top-down authoritarianism. And at least the more you decentralize authoritarians, like I say, that just like when they like to use the divide and conquer, well, the people can do that too. And, and the only way you're going to conquer the authoritarians is to decentralize, right? Because if we're all just running in lockstep with each other in one single row, well, they've got one target that they have to focus all their means and their might upon. Whereas if we're decentralized, it's much, much harder to fight us if we're decentralized. That's what the blockchain, that's what Bitcoin, that's what cryptocurrencies represent to me, is to decentralize things and give power back to the people.
That's really what it is. I mean, divide and conquer, you said it so well. Divide and conquer has been used over and over and over again for thousands of years.
Yep.
It's how the British took over the Indian subcontinent. It's how they maintained that. Decentralization is about divide and conquer. It's about taking those big, oversized, bloated, centralized modes of authority and breaking them down. And technology, to me, is one of the ultimate disruptors. Technology has changed the world, and it keeps changing it. The smartphone, the internet, you name it. The blockchain, to me, is one of those big revolutions. And it hasn't happened yet, but it's an enabler. It's going to enable the breakdown of these centralized powers, and now you have the decentralization. And going back to what you were talking about with wars, I mean, wouldn't it be great? I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones. I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones, and I love the fact that despite Cersei and the Lannisters being these evil people, at the end of the day, there's one thing that held true: they respected the bank. They knew what they could afford to fight and what they couldn't afford to fight. Because at the end of the day, if she couldn't fight because she didn't have the gold or the money from the bank, she just won't fight. Now look at our governments right now. They can fight any war they want because they can just go print more money. Wouldn't it be great if, some country said, well, I wanted to attack that guy, but I can't afford it.
that would be an amazing thing to see. And that would be a reflect. Like I say, that's how you create world peace, folks, is yet stop giving these authoritarian hacks carte blanche ability to like I say, economically enslave. Because I use this as a descriptor for so many people. Is you might not be thinking about it today, but all the debts that are currently on the ledgers of all central banks and governments, none of us, if we all worked every day for the rest of our life, those of us that they're at least have benefited anyway, although most of us haven't, but we couldn't pay off all the debts. They rely on enslaving entire generations. And at the very least, the best thing I can hope for is to get out from underneath of enslaving entire generations of people to pay for what's happened today. Cryptocurrencies and decentralize and make sure that the people that want to do the nefarious stuff, and they're going to exist whether we like it or not, but don't give them the ability to enslave entire generations of people to pay for the nefarious deeds in the here and now. At the very least, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Neeraj, but don't give these people the carte blanche ability to enslave entire generations to pay for the failures of here and now. Because at some point in time, no matter how many times you kick that can down the road, eventually you're going to catch up that can at some point in time. And that's what we're seeing time and time again. Is we got to get to the point where we start having a little bit of semblance of respect and trust of each other. And even if you don't want trust in terms of, you don't know everyone you can trust, but that's what the ledger does. I don't have to rely on that Neeraj is going to be a trustworthy guy on the other side of that. The technology is going to take a precedent and making sure that he has to be responsible and I have to be responsible. So we don't have to place it in the hands of a fallible human being. We can use mathematics, right? We can use things that actually can't be manipulated. We can use 2 + 2 = 4 as the basis for our exchange, rather than relying on some fallible human being that we've all learned time and time again, folks. Humans, we are all fallible. There's not one person on this planet that you can rely on and trust solely to make sure things are going to unfold properly. No, that's the beautiful thing about decentralizing and placing your trust and your faith in things that are completely conducive in terms of holding each other to account. That's the way to hold each other as being personally responsible, not looking to mommy, daddy to take care of you from cradle to grave and think that they're going to be able to figure everything going forward. No, take that personal responsibility, shift ourselves to, like I say, getting back to being adults, or actually I should say not even get back to, because I don't think humans have actually experienced that much through history, because every time we try to get to that point, There's some that tries to take us back to adolescence because they realize that it's much, much harder to control an adult who is thinking critically about the issue. So we're constantly, that's the history of humanity. Try to get to the point where we understand things critically, and then somebody figures out a better trap to put us back in the doldrums where we're now got to rely on central planners. I'm saying in the modern information age, in this technological era, we don't have to keep repeating that same mistake over and over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, people want responsibility, but you know what? It feels good to kind of go back to your teenage years and not have that responsibility and have mommy and daddy paying for everything. And you know what? People grow up, they're adults, and they want all the benefits of being an adult. But you know what? If I go on stage and I tell people, you know what? You're going to be responsible. We're getting rid of mommy and daddy, the centralized powers, and you got to be responsible now. You got to pay your rent. You're not going to get handouts, but nobody's going to steal from you. And they don't hear the second part. They hear the first part and they're like, wait a minute, you mean I got to work for this now? And it's not free and blah, blah, blah. And it's the short-term thing. I mean, the thing is, responsibility is bitter medicine, and people want the candy. And when you're going into that voting booth, in the last 2 weeks before you walk in to vote on October 21st, you know what you've been hearing on the media? You didn't hear me and the Libertarians talking because we're not on the debates. No. We don't have the money to get on TV commercials. You're hearing the other guys, and I'm not going to name anyone, and they're trying to give you that nice lollipop. They're trying to sell you the candy bar.
Yeah.
And they're like, eat this, it tastes good. And people are like, well, I love that. I'm going to vote for that guy. It doesn't matter if I get diabetes or tooth decay next week, because people don't think at the short term. They just want to enjoy what they get. And that's the responsibility thing. So the Libertarian brand, I mean, this is the challenge, right? We got to have a way to deliver the messaging, because at the end of the day, we know we're right. It's logically defined, but if you're in a democracy, you got to present the message in a way that's marketable, that's branded, and is digestible, and you got to take it in steps. And that's the challenge here. That's something that I myself try to work on. I'm a scientist. I don't necessarily have the tact that someone that works with people has. And that's something I always try to find myself improving, is how can I deliver a message that I'm completely have 100% conviction about, but how can I get someone else to understand it? And I can tell you that when I get the forum, and this is just a general, debate thing, is when libertarians get a forum where they can get a fair chance to talk to people and just kind of lay it out in a sensible way, I can tell you that people get it. They understand it. And and if anything, people will admit to me, they'll go, look, you know what? The only thing I can tell you is I admit I don't want responsibility. I'm admitting it completely. I'm scared. I like to get these free things, but you're right. I mean, this isn't healthy. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe I'm not looking at the long term.
Well, I will say cultural drivers are the one impetus that I think is dominant, and that's where we got to get these things today, which is why I love some of these modern technologies, even some of the streaming services or some of these social media, as much as there's problems with them. But hey, it gives me the ability today as just one dude to be able to say and bring someone like Neeraj in here. I mean, we can be talking from both sides of this entire country and challenge the establishment. Well, so can some of these blockchain technology. To me, that's what I wanted us to do, is make cultural drivers. So whether it's the music, that's what's absent today is people in music, poets, artists, music, or movies, television, all these people that are the cultural drivers in society. You need to be pivoting to more personal responsibility and less just mindless entertainment. We all love the mindless entertainment, but even I know growing up, even when I was rejecting some of because I was raised in a very Christian family, but some of the stuff I was raised with, is like, I kind of pivot away from it because it just didn't resonate with me. It just didn't make any sense because it wasn't consistent, right? And that's a problem. So we're always seeking some way to give us something in our culture that drives us to moral or ethical stances and understand things in terms of even whether you're talking about academics even, but culture is the best driver for that. Politics, I've said this many times in the past, politics is downstream. Let's get our culture. So whether we're using things such as social media or some people that are the up and comers in the music industry or the movie industry, is let's get culture, getting people more adopting these things. Because finger wagging at people, I recognize even myself. I could put out video time after time again, day in, day out, finger wagging or trying to educate and inform people in a particular manner. I mean, it'll work for some. It's not going to work for everyone. So that's that beautiful thing about decentralized and a myriad of ways to try to figure out ways to help people adopt more libertarian oriented things is the culture, right? When I was growing up, the things that I learned was driven by the culture of the day, which, so, you know, when I learned about being rebellious against the state, a lot of that stuff was in the music and the movies and a lot of the things I consumed. So I carried that with me, but I was smart enough as an adult to realize that that's good. That's good to challenge, you know, to have a little bit of rebellious spirit. But if you don't have anything that's your driver, that's the other thing, is if you reject everything that's your principles in life, that's what I see that people are predominantly on the left side of the spectrum, is they realized that the authoritarians that were their thought leaders or their educators or their politicians in the past, they said, okay, that's it, we're throwing everything out. But that's not a proper way. You can't throw the baby with the bathwater, because there's going to be underlying things in every culture that are very important. To me, is let's keep the good stuff, right? So the things that we have learned predominantly in the West is individual freedom. I don't care, out of everything that I've ever heard from anyone in all of history, is the most important thing that I can take away from Western ideas is the individual thing. Because collectivism, even in the religion, like some of the religion, I was told by a lot of religious leaders, and they all shared, so it has nothing to do with race. It's even my own skin color people always kept telling me, sacrifice my individuality for the collective. But those people that wanted to sacrifice me for the collective, most of the time were the people that were going to benefit as making me the sacrificial lamb, right?
That's right.
So to me, it's like, at the end of the day, is get cultural drivers out there to give us all a better, healthy self-esteem of what it is to be a free human being. And if you give yourself, just like with when I raised my kids, if you raise and adopt anyone, whether you're talking about in a small family structure or in a societal structure, if you teach everyone to have a healthy self-respect and self-esteem, and not be beholden to just sacrificing them willy-nilly to anybody, like I said, whether it's a monarch or a dictator or a pharaoh or a religious leader or a politician or a political party. Give people a good, healthy self-esteem. Give them some drivers that gives them a proper moral or ethical stance in terms of things. And like I say, they don't have to go, like, to me, it's like, especially the young people, I would never say, oh yeah, just go to church, folks. No, there's lots of ways to get people up to speed in adopting good ethical and moral practices, but we need cultural drivers. And that's one thing I see that is definitely lacking today, is we need some cultural drivers out there that are especially for the young people, because I see a lot of the young people, they're like, I don't know where to turn. They're like, do I go to the liberals that are promised me freebies all the time, or the people on the left side of the spectrum, or am I going to turn towards these conservatives because I recognize I probably should, be more economically responsible? At the end of the day, no, listen, you might get some from here, you might get some from there. Just like when I was raised by my mother and father, I got some good stuff from my mother, I got some bad stuff from my father, I got some bad from either and good from either or. But at the end of the day, is what's good. Let's make that the dominant drivers in our culture, in our society. And I think we're never going to perfect anything, but at the very least, if you have your culture driven by good morals, good ethics, and good standards and good principles, well, that's the best case scenario that you can hope for.
Yeah, no, I like what you're saying. I think that's the way to really get these sorts of ideas into mainstream and accepted, is you start with the society, you start with the upbringings, you start with, education, whether it starts at the kindergarten or preschool level. I mean, I can still remember the values that was taught in school, and it's either stuff that's misleading or it's the absence of these sorts of ideas where, you talk about, people taking responsibility. You talk about in civics class or social studies about the fact that, for example, I was in social studies, and I know that never once was there any talk about, well, how critical should we really be about, money coming down from the government for subsidies for this and that. I mean, money, these handouts, whatever they are, whether it's corporates or social welfare or whatever, these are not free. Money has to come from somewhere. And if you're printing it in the basement of the Fed or whatever, you're kicking the can down the road. Somebody's going to pay for it, and it's going to have an impact. None of these things transcend math. They don't transcend the laws of economics. And unfortunately, I suspect that with the current generation, it's even more so a problem, because now they're so much more vulnerable to social media. I mean, when we were growing up, we didn't have all these messages. We had television. Television was bad, but what we have now is stuff that is so much more customized and targeted. And they're confused, and they're getting messages that they're just not getting the messaging that teaches them what they need. I mean, voting's a skill.
Yep.
Let's not forget that it is a skill. It's not a natural born ability to vote responsibly.
Yeah.
And when people show up to a voting booth, they a lot of people I think that, wow, you know, I'm a citizen, I do whatever, wow, this is great, I can vote, but they don't realize the grave responsibility being put on their shoulders, and that one vote that they cast could ultimately negate the vote of someone else who might have made a responsible choice.
Right.
And I think this disillusions. It actually disillusions what I would argue the people that are maybe more skilled at voting. And this is blasphemy, perhaps, that, you know, now you have to almost decide who's got more weight or who's more qualified to vote and blah, blah, blah. But look at what happened with, you know, Brexit. And I mean, I'm going to say that, you know, I was shocked at that. I guess I underestimated what could happen. But, you know, that happened. And, you know, even looking at what happened in the 2016 U.S. election, I mean, I'm not necessarily pro-Democrat or Republican, but again, you see what's coming out of these electoral outcomes, and it's like, what's going on here? I mean, what's being manipulated? What are people thinking? I mean, do they understand? So, you know, people need to be they need to be critical thinkers. They can't just take what's been given to them, whether it's social media or even what's being taught to them in the schools. I mean, gosh, schools and education, they got to reform what they're talking about. They got to teach kids about the fallacies of logic. They got to teach students that I don't care who's in government. I don't care if it's your prime minister or your president. You got to look at this guy and you got to call him out on what he's saying or what she's saying. And, you know, the debates, all that stuff. Like, people need to be critical thinkers, and they got to take politics in a good way. Not the bad side, but they got to take politics seriously, because the politician's the guy, the captain running our ship for the next 4 years. He's the guy. And you know what? You should be concerned about who's driving the ship.
Yeah. And, you know, that's one area, especially when you're talking about tribalistic shit and democracy and how people get divvied up and pitted in their own. To me, the only thing, and this is most important to me, when I say family, I've even heard people say, well, if you make family, it's so important to you. Well, aren't you? Well, to me, see, that's the thing. Family, what family means to me, a proper family is we try to hold ourselves, each other. Well, as a father, I want to hold myself to a high standard. Why? Because if I'm going to be a father and I'm raising my children, what I recognize at the end of the day is I am going to be the major influence and contributor to who they're going to be as adults. So I want to lead by example. But when I talk about family, it's not about collective. I don't want to sacrifice any of my children to me. What I want them to do is I want them to hold themselves to the same kind. So why I stress the importance of the individual and why libertarianism is so important to me is if I stress the importance of the individual, which is me, is that makes me also responsible. If I'm going to hold myself as the individual as the highest thing in society, that means I automatically have to hold myself to a high standard. I can't give myself the cover of just saying, oh, I'm part of the group or I'm part of the collective. I'm holding myself to a standard, and I'm going to do that for my own children, which means if I use personal responsibility, individual sovereignty as the emphasis for how I raise my kids, and it worked out very well for me. I don't know about every other libertarian, but for me, I used libertarian values when I was raising my children, and they become but we're still very close. But what it is neither one of us would ever just succumb to each other willy-nilly for just, you know, let's say I, did something really bad and I just used top-down collectivism as a means to impose my will on my kids. And it's like, I do bad things and then my kids just come to bail me out when I do bad things. Matter of fact, by teaching my kids to be personally responsible and autonomous and sovereign themselves, if I fuck up, hopefully they'll recognize my fallibilities and point them out to me. That's the only way, actually, that I think is beneficial for us all, is to make sure we're holding each other to account. So rather than sacrifice the individual to the collective, I'm saying I'm all for family. And, like I say, it doesn't matter about personal, like me and my children, as far as like we all share the skin color or Neeraj. To me, it's the ideas. If Neeraj, I would consider Neeraj part of my family by sheer fact that he's someone that respects my autonomy and my sovereignty, and I do for him. So to me, at the end of the day, is if we can hold that as the highest idea and the highest value and the principle, then at the end of the day, all those other things that people fight and bicker over, we can put that shit to the wayside. To me, that's that's like low resolution bullshit. When you hear people talking about racism or sexism or fucking listen, I'll tell you, someone that was raised in a Christian family, there's some fucking individuals that are raised as Christians that are just as ridiculous as anyone that come from different cultures or religions. So to me, that's why I don't emphasize the collective thing. It's the individual. So if I recognize the individual, and people say that, oh, what are you, just one of those people who just want to live on an island? Because they don't understand what libertarians, when we talk about the individual, it has nothing to do with saying that I'm the only one that matters. No, what it means to be an individual means that if I'm going to be considered an individual, and people are going to focus on me, like it's like looking at the tree instead of the forest, right? If you're going to look at the tree, well, that's where your focal point is. And if you're looking at the tree, you'll see the knots in the tree, you'll see the branches, you'll get a better understanding of what that tree is, rather than just say it's just part of the forest, right? Matter of fact, the best way we can deal with each other is not just look at each other as just part of the forest, but as individual trees, because once again, we're not all exactly equal in any way, but we can recognize the positive and negative attributes that each and every one of us bring to the equation. That's the personal responsibility thing that I love about libertarianism, is I don't have to care about this top-down kind of sense of like, oh, I just got to fit into, like, I mean, even the left today, they don't even give a shit about skin color anymore, per se. They say it's just aligned with my ideas. Well, you know what? Stalin, Mao, right? Thought the same goddamn thing, but that's the kind of top-down structures where it's like you're just using the mysticism of authoritarianism as your means to an end. Whereas if you respect the individual, then the individual is the one that you'll have to acknowledge with each other. So my kids, I don't say if one son does something wrong, I don't say, oh, well, I better punish my other son, right? No, I'll know exactly who did wrong. That's the importance of stressing the individual. It's not that we want to be isolated or alone. It's just that that's how we hold each other to account. That's really, at the end of the day, the only possible way we have to hold each other to account is to acknowledge the individual.
Oh, yeah, it is. And, I'm sure you've run into it. People look at libertarians, and often one of the things is you guys are self-centered assholes. You're greedy. You don't care. Blah blah blah. What about the rest? I'm like, this is bullshit. You don't understand.
Yeah,
it's actually quite a paradox almost, because it's like, you know what? If you're not looking at yourself in the mirror every day and you're actually thinking, oh, I'm part of the mob, and we're all just doing this, it's all cool. That's what the politicians are saying. You're actually not holding yourself to account. And in libertarianism is not about being selfish and me, give me this. It's more about, what the hell am I doing? Am I holding myself to account? Forget my children, forget my mom or my dad or whoever. Am I doing what I believe in? Am I holding myself to account? And then, and only then, can you say, this is what I expect as a result of it. Because really, it's about inputs and then outputs. You can't. You can't, it's just like any kind of machine. You put inputs, you got outputs. Exactly. You can't expect to just dilly-dally around following these collective, propagandas and cliches, and then expect that, everything's going to work in your favor, and then finger pointing. It's like, not that. And so libertarianism really is about it. It's about individual responsibility.
Yep.
And that's what all our principles are founded upon. And you know what? Again, it's scary to people when you're telling them, hey, you know what, buddy, look in your mirror, look in the mirror, and you call them out on it. People get defensive. They're insecure. And you know what? The first thing that you do when you corner someone logically is they might turn to ad hominem attacks, or they might just say, screw it. You know what? Logic aside, I'm going and I'm going to do what I want. So you know what? It's a really delicate process when at least when you're talking to people about libertarianism, is you kind of got to walk them through it in a way where they understand at the end of the day, their own individual welfare is optimized and is maximized by first looking at yourself in the mirror and taking responsibility and looking at, all these things and being like, you know what, maybe, receiving these subsidies at the end of the day, it's actually not good for me or my kids because you're just kicking the can down the road. My kids are going to pay for it. They're getting it free, whatever now. And 25 years down the road, they're going to be paying for that. They're going to deal with that. That's not free.
No. And that's the shame of it all, is that we don't know how the future is going to unfold. Nobody has that crystal ball or the magic 8 ball. You don't know what's going to take precedent in the future. So at the very least, and that's something that, especially in the economic realm, is take your personal responsibility. If we weren't in the situation we are today, you wouldn't have to worry about this ridiculous aspect in terms of the economy, in terms of people being priced. I mean, we have entire generations of people in the West today that are priced entirely out of the market, of the housing market. Why? Because central planners and manipulation of our currency and devaluation and pivoting to a lot of investors realize that too many of the games have been rigged. So the stock market, the bond market, everyone's finding a way to, I'm not saying everyone that does this is bad. Some of the people that do these things are just trying to hedge against their own destruction of their purchasing power. But because they've now looked into other safe havens, the housing market is now this new thing where now all of a sudden you just sit in a house in Canada today and you just wait till next year and boom, magically it's worth like, hundreds of $1,000s or more. I mean, that's good for you if you're the recipient of that central planning and that manipulation of the economy. But what about the other people that are on this other side of that? That kind of causes a lot of economic divide and a lot of social strife. Think about it. People think of things in the macro, right? And I like to do that because I like the big picture perspective, but I recognize, especially people from the left, they're very wise in bringing it all the way down to the individual when they're talking about stories, because they use the compassion or the emotional appeal of that. Well, think about how many Canadians today that are young people didn't contribute to any of this bullshit, and they're like, they've been really hard working, they went to school, they got good grades, they paid all that ridiculous amount they had to pay in student loans, and they're like, I just want to, maybe at some point in time start a family, and a lot of them are putting off or postponing that for decades. For decades. Why? And nothing that they've done, but by sheer fact that they've been priced out of the market where they don't even feel that they're in an economic situation where they can even have a family. How messed up is that? Like I say, that affects entire, not just populations, but the psychology of entire populations. Then you got the central planners that are saying today, like, this is how weird thing is. They've been trying to manipulate things to the point where now people are like, I don't even want to have kids because, like, I don't know, I can't even take care of myself. But then they want to use mass immigration. It's like, well, wait a minute. If your domestic citizens were having kids of their own, you wouldn't have to, worry about filling up the coffers with using immigrants. And that's the other thing for these immigrants. I have nothing against even the immigrants. I actually recognize and acknowledge that, matter of fact, they're being taken advantage of tremendously. A lot of those people that have actually been used for these schemes that come to this country, what they don't realize today, and I'd love to tell them, and actually I try to tell this to people all the time, is, no, the people in the Western leaders in these societies, they're just using you as a backstop, as slave wages to pay off and promise these future bondholders that, don't worry, the bonds will be okay here in 10 years. No, so they're just, like I say, slavery didn't. I've used this before too. Slavery never went away.
No, that's a great piece about the slavery. You're absolutely right. I mean, slavery takes many forms, and people got to realize it's not as literal as it was in the U.S. and I think in Canada back, in those really dark era, I would say. But slavery has now taken on maybe a less obvious form, and we're all slaves now to these power authorities. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you actually look at the fact that you can't afford to buy a house, you can't afford to have the standard of living that you worked hard for, you've been working, all this time, you keep working really hard, and a lot of your money is going to these authorities who are spending it, and you don't have a choice. I mean, you're forced to pay the tax. I mean, what do you call that? I mean, nobody signed a contract saying that they were going to do all this. I never signed a contract. I don't remember when I signed it, yet I'm indentured to society to accept their decisions forced upon me, and I got to pay for it.
Right.
I mean, that's as good a definition of slavery if you've ever asked for one.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I hear people always say things towards libertarian in such a negative manner. It's like, no, actually, not that when I say that I'm against mass immigration, it has nothing to do with, listen, I don't give a shit. Like I said, I care about people's ideas and what rolls around their mind. And I've even said this live on streams in the past and have gotten into a couple heated exchanges with some people that share my skin colors. It has nothing to do with your color, your skin, your background, where you come from. It comes to do with the fact that the central planners are going to use people, whether they're domestic slaves and serfs or ones from. To me, actually, the best thing a libertarian can do is help people get out from underneath this pretense of slavery. And I want to do that not just for the people that are already on the plantation in Canada today, but even for the hundreds of thousands of people that are inadvertently being brought into this plantation. They have no idea how they're going to be used to prop up this system. That's the thing. So to me, it's not, I don't care when people try to make the accusation towards libertarians that, you're just unthinking or cold-hearted. That's not the case. I will recognize, and I'll say 100%, yes, I am very much more conducive with caring about my own personal situation. That's just to be honest, as we all are. I mean, that's what it is to be. I don't care if you're in the state of nature or a human being. You have to worry about yourself. If you don't, well, you're just, like I say, just a sacrificial lamb for someone else. So you have to worry about your own personal situation. But just like with Adam Smith and some of these people that understood economics and brought the morality into the equation in terms of libertarian values and principles, is no. If we do things right, it not only will it benefit me, it'll benefit all the other people that I don't even maybe I don't necessarily care. Like I say, the hundreds of thousands of immigrants come to this country. I'm not going to pretend that I care about every one of them. That would be just bullshit. I'm not a politician, right? But I will recognize and acknowledge right away that a lot of the people that are coming to this country, you're going to get screwed over worse than I am. And by people that, like I say, share my exact same skin color. So don't fall for the rhetoric. At the end of the day, libertarians are the kind of people that are just telling you the cold, hard facts. You don't want to get, stereotype us in a way, because trust me, we're the only ones at the end of the day that are saying things that are proper and legit. When I say 2 + 2 is 4, I'm not saying it because I'm a scientist or a mathematician and saying, well, I care about my endeavor or my field, so I need everybody to acknowledge that 2 + 2 is 4. When I say 2 + 2 is 4, it's not just to benefit myself, the fact, so when I go to the store and grab a couple things, I can make that measurement, but I'm going to make sure all the other people, right? You're going to learn and adopt your mentality and your psychology. So you're thinking critically about these issues too. So to me, it's a benefit for all of us to think about things in terms of libertarian values and principles, because if you want to have freedom flourish, and that's nothing. Why would you want to bring everyone to this fucking country? Matter of fact, if you can create freedom somewhere else around the world, because that's the thing. One thing I will say is there's governments that break down and get destroyed all over the world. Happens on a regular basis. Hey, rather than constantly plundering the intellectual resources from some of those countries, maybe those people, rather than coming here being slaves to the ruling class in Canada, maybe they might create the next Liberland or somewhere that's actually done things better. I'll move there. To me, at the end of the day, all I want is freedom to flourish. I want individual sovereignty to be respected. And the best thing we can do is get people out from under this top-down central planning system, which tries to use a one-size-fits-all approach for billions of people that, like I say, we're not machines, we're not robots, we're not the Borg, folks. If you respect and understand that sovereignty is what matters most, then get out from underneath anything that tries to place us all into one narrow confine.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said earlier about this whole thing that, at the end of the day, if you take responsibility, and even if you might appear individualistic and selfish about yourself and your family as an extension, the fact of the matter is, the simple principles of all that and the results of all those inputs that you put in yourself and your family and into society is going to result in a society that's being run much more efficient and truthfully and transparent, and it's going to have a better impact. It's really simple. I'm going to simplify. If you go around blowing a horn and saying 2 + 2 is 5, and hey, you know what? We'll put 2 + 2 into this machine, and somehow 5 will come out of it, and everyone's going to be happy, and we're all going to have Ferraris. It's bullshit. It's complete crap, and that's what people are literally indoctrinated with. And when they go to vote, they actually believe 2 + 2 is 5, and we're the assholes saying 2 + 2 is 4. It's so not true that it's 5. You're not getting the Ferrari. You got to get off your ass. And you got to do the work, and that we look like the bad guy. We're the doctor telling you, you know what, you got to stop eating the bacon, you got to eat the broccoli, and you got to, eat your vegetables. And you know what, people don't want to eat their vegetables.
It's a story as old as time, right? It's so much easier. That's the thing with the political class. They realize it's so much easier to just promise people the world and plunder other people's economic prosperity to give them some semblance that they have the ability to take care of them from cradle to grave. But at the end of the day, the only people that are truly benefit from that are people that have shown that they've grown into adults and no longer even understand what it is to be sovereign. Why do you think so many people clamor for big government? These are people that have actually admitted that over the entire course of their life, they have still not attained any point or any semblance in their personal life where they're responsible enough where they can say, I don't need someone to forcefully redistribute someone's income or to dictate and control every area of everyone's lives to take care of me from cradle to grave. To me, a libertarian, the best thing that we do, what we bring to the equation is giving people, and the young people today, especially the millennials and the Gen Zs that are coming up around them, all us libertarians really want at the end of the day is to teach you some of those cold, hard lessons that, it might have taken us multiple generations or decades to get there. All I'm saying is in the age of information, I'm trying to help you. And I've done this for my own kids. I want to help you as best I can to get you up to speed so you don't have to go through as many trials and tribulations as I've had to get this point. And I don't even want to get you to the point where you don't go through any, because that's one thing I also understand too, is that people have it too easy in life and don't have to go through any trials or tribulations. Yeah, they're not necessarily in the great position to be leaders in terms of how actually humans should properly flourish and exist, because that's to live and fit and thrive in the world today, whether you're in the state of nature or you're a human being, is a struggle. Life is a struggle. You're never going to get out from underneath the fact that life is a struggle. But at the end of the day, the best thing you can offer and provide for people is give them the intellect, so they have the self-esteem, so they have the principles, they have the morality, and then the beautiful thing about blockchain technology and Bitcoin, now give them the resources that they can use to better make sure that freedom actually carries through, not just from their mind, but it carries through in their real life.
Going back to the Bitcoin and blockchain thing and putting kind of a tie to this whole conversation.
Yep.
I definitely want to say that, to everybody watching this, look at Bitcoin, educate yourselves. Don't take my word for it. Understand how it works. It's solid technology. The media. I'm not going to go into a conversation about whether the media is intentionally or not doing this whole thing about when they talk about blockchain negatively. But the fact of the matter is, Bitcoin, for example, all these technologies, they're solid technologies. They haven't been hacked. What people hear about are human failures, not math failures. Math doesn't fail. It doesn't lie. And you have to understand that. And you have to also understand, as I was alluding to most of this time, is that Bitcoin meets all the requirements of a gold standard. Right. And if you truly are interested in protecting what you're earning, the value, the money that you have right now, take a look at it. I'm not asking you to go and buy it, but take a look at it, understand it, and see why the points I'm making hold true, and why this is something that really I believe is going to make major changes. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It's something that I have to deal with when I'm talking to people, when I'm campaigning. And, blockchain and Bitcoin is a large part of my own campaign here now in the federal election. I'll be talking about it a lot on the debates and stuff. And I really hope that a lot of good has come from this conversation.
Well, I know for me personally it has, and I really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me today. And I will say to the folks that are watching the chat, is I do have a Bitcoin wallet. I should have done it long ago. So I do have a Bitcoin address. If anyone does want to donate Bitcoin to me, I'm always willing to accept that, obviously. And Neeraj, I'm sure, is the same way. And like I say, listen, folks, I'm always going to try to bring as many people onto this show as possible to help try to educate and inform you in terms of things. Because I still don't have a firm grasp on this, although Neeraj has kind of helped me kind of understand a little better today. And I think I'm at least on the right track. But yeah, this is a great thing. And then as Neeraj saying, he's a Libertarian Party candidate. If you're a supporter and you're one of those people that just want to show that you're a principled person, vote for Neeraj. It's okay. There's not even someone like myself, even though I obviously I'm kind of trying to support the PBC at this particular junction. I'm still, at the end of the day, I recognize that the Libertarian Party is the one party in this entire country that represents me as a person, my ideals, my principles. That's what most resonates with me. And hopefully we can get to the point where, we can all accept and adopt libertarian values and principles and make that the premise for how we go forward. Because I think that's the best methodology. If you're going to have anything in terms of how we engage, interact with each other socially or economically, is the core fundamental principles and values of libertarian. That's basically the best methodology that you can use going forward. And libertarians are the leaders in terms of the philosophy of human engagement and interaction. It goes all the way back, folks. Aristotle would have not necessarily identified as a libertarian, but some of the very premises that he put forward all those 2,500 years ago had been built and expanded upon to what we are today in this modern understanding of what it is to be a free human being. So thank you, Neeraj, for coming on this show. And like I say, share all your stuff. Put everything, send it in that email that we were exchanging it. Send anything that you want and a picture to use as a thumbnail. And like I say, everyone, if you're in Neeraj's riding, go support the man, Libertarian Party candidate. And because, once again, no matter if you're voting for PBC or the Libertarian Party, at the very least, you're saying you're a principled person, and you're not just putting your money where your mouth is, but you're putting your principles first and foremost. So at the end of the day, it's not about, we're not going to win and just checking a box every few. That's not how you're going to change your culture. But at the very least, you can send that message. If you're voting for a Libertarian Party candidate, at the very least, you're sending a message that you're principled in some way. And that's one area that you can take and sleep at night comfortably and peacefully, saying that you at least did something to step up and put your best foot forward to try to put this country in a proper path going forward, and build and expand on some of the great ideas that many people that are much smarter than I was in the past. And that's all I'm trying to do, is carry forward some of those great ideas and hopefully expand upon them and create a society that, like I say, we're standing on the backs of a lot of people in the past. And I'm saying, I don't want to stand on their shoulders. I want to build that foundation so that other people can stand on multiple layers at some point in time. So thanks, Neeraj. And like I say, put all those links, and everyone that joined in the chat, join me. I just want to mention this before I let you go, Neeraj, is I got Nancy Mercier on Tuesday. I'm going to be having a conversation with her. I believe it's at 7 p.m. East, 6 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Atlantic time. And thank you, Neeraj, for having this conversation. And we'll talk, if you ever want to reach out again, whether it's in regards to the Libertarian Party, helping you on your candidacy, or promoting you, or talking about blockchain or Bitcoin, or any cryptocurrencies for that matter, always reach out to me, and I'm willing to give you the platform to do so, buddy.
Well, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
All right, man. Have a good one. And all you in the chat, we'll see you in the next one. Take it easy. Stay libertarian.
Bye-bye.
Liberty.